The John Harbaugh era officially hit the ground in East Rutherford, but while phase one of the voluntary program is underway, the real story wasn't just about who was in the building, it was about the identity and purpose being forged behind closed doors.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and on this episode of Locked On Giants, John Harbaugh and his three coordinators addressed the media for the first time via video call, and as you can imagine, a hot topic centered around Dexter Lawrence and where things stand with him. So we'll devote the first part of the show to that topic. And then we'll also take a look at some of the interesting things that defensive coordinator Dennard Wilson had to say about his plans for the defense. And then we've got some miscellaneous takeaways from the four coaches that spoke today, including injury updates and other notables. So let's get right into it because there's a lot to cover, as you can imagine. All right, so as you can imagine, Dexter Lawrence and his absence, a big topic of conversation. Now, John Harbaugh, in speaking to the media, he said that it wasn't a surprise. It wasn't that he found out about it the same time that, the rest of us found out, which was yesterday. And, Harbaugh had conversations with Dexter, several weeks ago, like when he was first hired, starting to build up that relationship. And the bottom line is that, right now it's in the hands of Dexter Lawrence's agent, Joel Segal, and general manager Joe Schoen and capologist Dawn Aponte to work all this out. So Harbaugh, if he's worried about this thing with Dexter Lawrence, he wasn't letting on. He basically is keeping calm about the whole thing. He said, look, I understand, where Dexter's coming from. We want him here. He wants to play. We think he wants to play here. We just got to be patient and let this play out. Now, that might be easier said than done because you've got a lot of people who are like, oh, just trade him, give him what he wants, grant him his release or whatever. Harbaugh's not ready to go there. And why should he? They don't play until September. They've got plenty of time to work this out. All right. So although Harbaugh didn't put any predictions on this whole situation and when it might get resolved, here's what I can tell you. If Dexter Lawrence isn't traded by the time we get to the draft, he'll be back. All right. If the Giants are going to move him, and I think that is a big if, because I don't believe the Giants are going to get what they might be looking to get for Dexter Lawrence, which would be at least a first-round pick in this year's draft. I don't think the Giants are going to get that. I would be very surprised. So, we know that Joe Schoen historically has a habit of overvaluing his players. I think he will do the same thing with Dexter Lawrence. And look, Dexter Lawrence, I get it. He's not happy with not being in the top 10 highest paid AP-wide defensive lineman. I get that. But I don't think Dexter is going to sit out. And one of the things Harbaugh did say about Dexter is that, when he did speak with him and the agent, basically Dexter's been training. He was in a good frame of mind. He's determined to come in, have his best year of football ever. He's highly motivated. Apparently last year's struggles got under his skin, and he is motivated. He is using that to light a fire underneath his backside. All things you want to hear, all things you want to know. And it's just a matter of working through the money. Now, I've mentioned this before. This is nothing new for the Giants. If you remember a couple of years ago, they went through that with Darius Slayton, where Slayton was upset with the money that he was getting, and Joe Schoen wasn't going to rip up the contract because he had just signed him to an extension. And Schoen said, okay, you know what? As a compromise, I'll give you some incentives. And if you reach them, then you'll make the money that you're looking for. That's what I think is going to happen with Dexter Lawrence. I think the Giants, it's too early, I think, for them to be looking at extending him. All right. Even though I think he should be extended, I can see the Giants' perspective here. And Harbaugh, in talking about Dexter Lawrence, said, look, it's going to come down to, Joe and Dawn and Joel Segal figuring this out. But he goes, we want him here. We are a better team with him here. And there's no doubt about it. So, Dexter, he's a pro. It's not like he's a rookie or a first-year player. He could come in here, and I'm sure he could pick up the defense fairly quickly. And if he's in good shape, like, Harbaugh said that he was told is the case, if Dexter is motivated the way he was told, Harbaugh was told, then there should be no problem about Dexter having his best year and maybe cashing in on that. So the bottom line, Harbaugh spoke about having patience. Now, this is not something that is, new to Harbaugh. He went through this with Lamar Jackson in Baltimore a few years ago, where Lamar Jackson was balking because he wasn't paid properly, and ultimately they worked it out. So Harbaugh really didn't blink an eye over this whole thing. His focus was on getting to know the players who showed up. And by the way, everybody showed up except for Dexter Lawrence, Paulson Adebo, and Sam Roberts, right? Adebo, nobody knows why Adebo didn't show up. But remember, it's a voluntary program. So maybe he had a reason, or maybe he was, had a flight cancel. Nobody knows the reason why. Harbaugh didn't even know the reason why. So I guess he was going to find that out after we got through with the call with him. And Roberts, I think, had surgery. So Harbaugh had said something about Roberts was not cleared yet to fly because the stitches had to heal. So, 3 guys didn't show up out of, I think, I want to say 78 guys that they have on the roster, I think. So that's not too bad. And by the way, I think a misconception a lot of people have is that just because a player shows up the first day, they think that the player is going to show up every single day. Doesn't work that way. Guys come and go. We just don't hear about it. So, that's common. Guys that have workout bonuses, they'll put in the time necessary to collect those workout bonuses. But not everybody's going to be there every single day. So overall, John Harbaugh said that it was a productive first day. He had everybody stand up and introduce themselves and give their purpose and intention as to what they brought to the table, kind of like an icebreaker exercise. Because Harbaugh was still trying to get to know some of these guys. I mean, there was a lot of guys he was meeting for the first time. So it was kind of like a kumbaya type of, team building exercise. And it's important because you want the chemistry to develop. You want guys to be able to count on each other, get to know one another. And, Harbaugh's just taking the psychological approach to starting to build a camaraderie with this team. So altogether, it sounded like, a very positive first day for the Giants. Harbaugh, just for timing purposes, he spoke to the media at just after 1:00. And the program started, I believe, 7:00 in the morning. So I think it went from 7 till noon. So Harbaugh spoke after the program was done. So again, bottom line, no sense of great worry about Dexter. I think there's a level of confidence that they'll get something done. I think, there was a level of optimism that everything is off on the right foot, but, still a lot of work to be done, still a draft to be had, still just a lot of tweaking and stuff like that. But overall, from Harbaugh's perspective, very, very productive call, very forthcoming. It was actually nice to get some stuff to, to write about, to talk about. I was surprised he was forthcoming with who was there and who wasn't there. But hey, listen, I'll take it. I'll take it because, it's stuff that we can, obviously pass along to you guys and gals. All right. So that being said, the next big topic is the defense. And Dennard Wilson, as one of the coordinators, was also on a call. So what did he have to say about the defense, and why am I so excited about what he had to say? Well, I'll tell you right after this. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Financial stress is something a lot of people are carrying right now, and it's not just about numbers. It can affect your sleep, your relationships, and your overall mental health in ways that build up over time. And the reality is, struggling with money doesn't mean that you failed. Sometimes it just means you haven't had the right kind of support. The stress that comes with trying to figure everything out on your own, the expectations you feel to have everything together, and how that pressure can spill into other areas of your life. Therapy isn't about financial advice. It's about working through the stress, the anxiety, and the emotions that come with it. With over 30,000 licensed therapists and more than 6 million people served, BetterHelp makes it easier to get matched and start focusing on what you need. When life feels overwhelming, therapy can help. Sign up and get 10% off at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's better, HELP.com/lockedon. All right, Giant fans, the off season doesn't exist for the Everydayer Club. Join the group chat to talk Big Blue year round and get every episode of the show ad free. Head on over to lockedonnygiants.supercast.com or hit the link in the show notes for more information or to join. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network in America. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And for those of you who might be new, first off, welcome. I'm a 30-plus year credentialed media member of the New York Giants. I am a beat writer, so I've been around the team for a long, long time. And happy to be here with you, and happy as well to welcome in the Everydayers and the Blue Crew community members with whom I'm looking forward to having our weekly lunch hour call this week. That'll be Thursday, guys. So we'll see you on Thursday. Bring your questions. All right. We're talking about the Giants' first day of the offseason program. A lot going on. We heard from John Harbaugh. We heard from the 3 coordinators. And I want to talk now about Dennard Wilson and what he had to say. Because after Dennard Wilson got done, I was like ready to jump out of my chair and just like scream in joy. Now, Dennard Wilson, very soft-spoken, but very laser-focused. All right, that was my initial impression of him. And he was asked about what his defense is going to look like. And he said, he actually named like 4 qualities that he's expecting his defense to take on: unpredictable, dynamic, decisive, and unapologetic. He also said that he's looking for them to be aggressively physical and nasty, but smart, and play on the edge while not hurting the team. Folks, I hope that that's what we see, because I don't need to tell you guys, since Wink Martindale left, how predictable has the Giants defense been? How much has that defense struggled? How is it that, they have looked at times like they, a disorganized mess? How often have we seen guys not used to the best of their abilities? Too often. And Wilson, if he makes good on this, on all this stuff, is going to change that. Now, the number one thing that the Giants need to address, the run defense. We've been talking about that on this show for I don't know how long. We can talk about the pass rush and how that's the strength of the defense. But unless that run defense does its job and limits the amount of yardage gained on first down and second down to set up pass rushing downs, what good is the run? What good is the pass defense? It isn't. All right. The pass rush is nullified, and it's been nullified now for quite some time. So Dennard Wilson is looking to get creative. I expect we'll see stunts and twists. We'll see some, maybe some exotic blitzes. This will probably be as close to what Wink Martindale used to run as you're going to get. And I don't know about you, but for me, that is a welcome change of pace, because the last couple of years, the defense has looked soft. Not so much the effort given by the guys, but just the overall scheme and the lack of creativity. So Dennard Wilson, in also speaking about the defense and his plans, he spoke about the three linebacker dilemma: Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, and Abdul Carter. Another big problem that the Giants had, especially last year, they could not figure out how to get all three of those guys on the field at once. It wasn't until Charlie Bullen came in and he started to say, you know what? Let's move some guys around. Let's mix things up a little bit. That's how we'll get them on the field at once. So Dennard Wilson echoed that. He said, look, you can move Abdul Carter just about anywhere, like a chess piece. He said, you can even have situations where you have 5 pass rushers on the field. So these are just some of the hints of what we could potentially see from the Giants defense. And is anybody not stoked about that after what we have seen from the defense the last couple of years? The Giants have good players on defense, with and without Dexter. And again, I believe Dexter Lawrence will be part of that defense. But the coaches need to put the guys in the right position to be successful. And they have not done a good job of that. So Dennard Wilson is going to fix that. All right. He talked about getting back to the New York style of football. And he was asked, what that meant to him. And he talked about, the toughness, the aggressiveness. Those of you who were alive in the 1980s and remember Giants football in the 1980s, especially the defense, you know what New York Giants football looks like on the defensive side of the ball. It's relentless. It's physical. It's bully ball is what it is. All right. But at the same time, it's not out of control to where, guys are going to grab each other and throw them to the ground, or, you're going to see cornerbacks that are handsy and stuff like that. You're going to see a degree of control, a degree of discipline, but within the confines of being aggressive. That's the difference. And that is something that this team has not been able to achieve. That's what Dennard Wilson wants to see from his defense. Now, does he have everything he needs to make this happen? Not necessarily. Dennard Wilson didn't go into, specifics. He talked very general terms like about Sonny Styles and some other, draft picks. But from my perspective, they need really good cornerback play. And by the way, I do think it sounds like they're going to see if they can't rejuvenate or jumpstart Deonte Banks' career. I think they still think very highly of him and his skill set. And it just sounded like they're confident that they'll be able to maybe get through to Deonte Banks and get him to play up to the level of his talents. So we'll have to see if they're right on that. So they definitely need another, or somebody to step up and be a CB1, which they do not have. They can use more help in the middle of that defense. And of course, on the defensive line. And if you watched yesterday's mini show, I talked about Peter Woods being a guy that the Giants have done significant work on, from what I understand. So maybe Peter Woods is a guy to keep an eye on in the draft. So just overall, that Giants defense, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's going to be a nasty looking one, but in a good way. Nasty in that it's going to make opponents coming in think twice about pushing them around. Far too long, opponents have pushed the defense around. They've gone up and down the field like it's nothing. Those days, if Dennard Wilson has his way and it works out the way he envisions it, those days are going to be over. And it's about time. All right, Giant fans, coming up next, some final thoughts, miscellaneous thoughts on various things from the coaches. Matt Nagy weighed in on a few things. We heard some injury updates and a bunch of other stuff. And I'll get that all for you right after this. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and it was a full day on Tuesday, not just for the players, but for the media. We were on the calls with the coaches for about an hour, 15 minutes each. Some really good stuff. I mean, This was probably one of the most productive calls I can remember having in a long time. The coaches were very generous with answers, very willing to help, at times revealing, which we really didn't get a whole lot of in the past. So I really enjoyed the calls, and I thought the questions were really good too. I mean, disclaimer, I kind of sat back and I listened because I wanted to get a feel for, how these guys communicated, what they might disseminate. But trust me, you will hear my voice on some of these questions moving forward, as we get in the building for stuff. Okay, so let's get back to some miscellaneous items. Now, a big question on everybody's mind, obviously, where are Cam Skattebo and Malik Nabers in terms of their rehabs? Now, Skattebo, I think we maybe had a better idea all along. Skattebo has been telling anybody who will listen that he's going to be ready for the start of the season, and he might even be able to do some stuff in the spring. The Giants having a voluntary mini camp in the the 3 or so days leading up to the draft. So I think it's like April 21st through the 23rd, I think is their voluntary mini camp. And no, the media will not be in that one. We're not getting access to that. So Skattebo, at some point, you get, according to what Harbaugh was saying, he felt confident that at some point Skattebo will be back on the field, maybe later this spring. And it sounds like Skattebo, with that ankle, will be ready for training camp. So that's good news. Now, Malik Nabers, that's another story. They do think Malik will be fine and ready to play comes, the season. But Harbaugh kind of hedged a little on that, saying that Malik is probably going to be somewhere during training camp, if not closer to the season. And I have said on this show, I have predicted that Malik Nabers will probably start the training camp period on the PUP list. That would not surprise me in the least. We will not see Malik Nabers in preseason, obviously. And speaking of which, the plan as of right now for the preseason games is for Harbaugh to play most, if not all, of the key players, which is another big thing. Now, that was actually said at the owners' meetings. But I'm just throwing that in there because, while we're on the topic of the preseason, that was music to my ears because, I've been screaming about that for the longest time, about how the Giants come out of the gate looking so sluggish and not ready. And that I blame for not being in the preseason games. You've got to get those reps. You got to get up to game speed, and you got to hit the ground running once the regular season starts. You can't afford to throw away the first 2 games and say, oh, they're an extension of the preseason. That argument always used to drive me crazy. Harbaugh doesn't think that way. Thank goodness. All right. So anyway, Skattebo and Nabers, at some point, both will be back. It just sounds like Skattebo is a lot further ahead than Nabers right now. So just something to keep an eye on right there. Now, Matt Nagy also spoke. And, the big question with Matt Nagy, and this was kind of an interesting one, and I think it was Ed Valentine who raised this question. Matt Nagy has a bunch of coaches around him that were either head coaches or offensive coordinators at other stops. And when you have all that experience around you, the concern is that sometimes voices can overrule other voices. So Matt Nagy was asked how that whole process has been going for him. And all right, remember, the coaches now, they've been at work since, February? With regards to designing their respective playbooks. Matt Nagy spoke very highly of the process, very highly of the experience around him. And he talked about, in particular, he mentioned the run game and how, that experience is going to help them develop that power run game that they want to run. He talked about Jackson Dart and how Jackson Dart is going to develop the expectations for him in year 2 of his NFL career. All right. And I've talked about that as well on this show. I've talked about how Dart's got to do a little bit better with, the deep ball. He's got to learn when to take go down when he's a runner. He's got to learn to work more under center. So these are all things that are on tap for Jackson Dart. Now you also get him, another playmaker or two at the wide receiver group, and now you're really talking. All right. So the Giants have made obviously a strong effort to surround and build around Jackson Dart. For me, the biggest question mark that I think they're still trying to figure out is the offensive line, particularly the interior of the offensive line. Now they added, Lucas Patrick to the interior, a guy who can play guard or center. I think he's going to be penciled in as the starter. I don't know that for sure. But the entire interior offensive line is still very much a concern in my book. Not just for this year, but for the long term. So, you've got John Runyon, who's going to be entering the final year of his deal. You've got John Michael Schmitz entering the final year of his deal. You don't have a long-term option at right guard. That's where I expect the Giants to go really heavy in the draft and double dip. It just makes too much sense not to. All right, you put the veterans in there, you let them hold down the fort while you develop the young guys, and then you just solidify that interior offensive line. Because you've got a pair of good tackles in Tremaine Illuminor and Andrew Thomas. You just need to beef up the interior of the offensive line. And, Nagy spoke about the power game. Well, if you're going to run the power game, you better have a strong interior offensive line. Otherwise, it ain't going to happen. So that was something he talked about. So, overall, the offense, a collaboration of different things. I expect the offense is going to have a significant Kansas City flavor to it. And, just other elements. You're going to see a little bit from the Baltimore power game, the power run game, with Greg Roman coming in. You'll just see a little bit of here and there to form the Giants' brand of offense. The last thing I'll mention real quick, special teams. We heard from special teams coordinator Chris Horton, who is also the assistant head coach. Now, interestingly, Chris Horton had a cup of coffee with the Giants way back in the day, all right, when Tom Coughlin was the head coach. So Horton got to learn a little bit under Tom Quinn, those guys. And, so here he is, special teams coordinator, and he's working with a whole new battery, although it's not a true new battery. He's familiar with Jordan Stout, so he spoke about, Jordan Stout's ability to flip the field, which, I know I've spoken about on this show. He spoke about the addition of Jason Sanders, the kicker, and how they believe he is fully over the hip injury that kept him out of last year's season. So just overall, when we talk about weaknesses of the Giants from last year and the year before that, special teams was a big one. And Horton he has this enthusiasm. When he was talking, you can just kind of see his eyes light up about what he wants to do and how he wants to flip the field and have special teams be an advantage and all that stuff. And you just kind of, I get it. Words are words, and you got to see what actually comes of it. But you couldn't help come away feeling good about what he was trying to sell, just like you couldn't help feeling good about what Matt Nagy was trying to sell and what Dennard Wilson was trying to sell. This coaching staff, in sum, has a plan for what they want, for how they want this football team to look. Now, that plan, we all know that plans don't totally go according to plan, that sometimes there are deviations, and there's going to be bumps in the road. But you just feel confident overall that these guys who are going to lead, the offense and the defense and special teams and the overall football team, you feel good in knowing that if something should get thrown into the middle of the road, like a monkey wrench or something like that, you feel good that they're going to be able to navigate them out of the problem as opposed to falling apart at the seams. All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Giants. Keep it here all week long. We've got plenty more coming up as we count down the days to the draft and then some. Till next time, everybody, have a good one.